Hi everyone! I can't believe we've reached 100 episodes of the Proactive Caregiver. This is such an amazing milestone, and I couldn't have done it without your support. When I started this mission, I was terrified. I had no idea of what I was doing, and I was worried that no one would read, listen, or watch it. But you all showed up from the very beginning, and you've never let me down. I've read your comments, listened to your stories, and cried with you. You've taught me so much about the challenges of caregiving, but you've also shown me the strength and resilience of caregivers. I am so grateful for your support. Thank you for reading my blog, listening to the podcast, watching and sharing the videos, and leaving the comments. Your feedback means the world to me. I know that caregiving can be a difficult and isolating experience, but I hope that this show has provided you with a sense of community and support. I know that it has for me. I'm so proud of what we've built together. The Proactive Caregiver is more than just a web show. It's a community of caregivers who are supporting each other through very tough times. I couldn't do this without you, so thank you for your support. And now I'm asking for your help. I want to reach even more caregivers with my message, so please share my blog, share the videos, share the Refuel support group with your friends and family. Tell them about the podcast, and let's show the world that caregivers are strong, resilient, and deserve our support. We are stronger together. Thank you again for everything.
Tell us a little about your background and how you became involved in caregiving.
Well, it started several years ago when I was the sandwiched parent. I started out caring for my family. I had 2 sons and a spouse, and occasionally caring for mom and dad. But as years passed, mom and dad struggled and their marriage ended after 37 years in divorce. And eventually, that role of caring for mom became more of a required necessity because as the boys got older, more independent, became young men, my need to be there for mom and my sisters involved with her care just kept increasing.
Tell us a little about your background and how you became involved in caregiving.
So during the years that I gradually became more involved in mom's daily care, the days and the routines gradually got more and more stressful. I started to experience things that I never thought that I would deal with. So at the end of every day, when I was trying to lay down and have a nice restful evening, these thoughts and ideas would just pop into my mind, and the monkey in the mind would start rolling and going, and I didn't know what that was. But as I started to fall asleep, I started picturing myself in this talk show style format where I was either asking someone questions or they were asking me questions, or the conversation was going on about our caregiving life. And the ideas started to kind of settle in as sharing the story with others. But I didn't really grasp that entirely until, as the years kept rolling forward and mom's needs increased by the year, and I became more and more involved in her life, that I realized, I need to attend a support group for some help. And the more I attended these groups, the more I was meeting caregivers who were asking these same questions, searching for the same answers, and also not finding them like I wasn't finding them. So then the idea of going forward and providing answers to those questions really started to become more like, maybe there is something behind this whole podcast idea. And so I started thinking, I've got to look into this. I got to research this. There's obviously something here, because it would not stop. Every night when I went to bed, these ideas, this imaginary talk show kept coming to mind, and it just wouldn't go away no matter what I tried to do to get that idea going.
What was it like doing the first few episodes and then adding cameras?
I realized this idea was not going to go away, and there really was something to this. I really started to lean in the idea of sharing my story and having others share their story with me to give caregivers a voice. That was very inspiring per se, but when it came time to actually do the podcast, the challenge was actually doing the podcast, because every time we had everything in place, everything ready to go, and as soon as I heard, okay, it's recording, go ahead and start when you're ready, my throat just closed up, and it was like suddenly I couldn't speak, and all these ideas that I had in my head, all these stories that I felt compelled to tell, just got choked up in my throat and wouldn't go anywhere. So we would stop recording, just put it all away, and try again another day. And we did that for a couple of weeks and probably a couple of months, where I got so frustrated and I couldn't figure out what's happening. And that's when I started to actually pray on this and meditate with this idea of, okay, God, if I'm supposed to share my story, and if I'm supposed to connect with others to help them share their story and give them a voice, then why isn't my voice working? What's happening to me? Well, it was a couple more months after that it was the trial and error. Just get a few minutes out. Just try a little bit. And then maybe it was who I was talking to. But that didn't say much when it was just me doing the talking. And that's when I realized, okay, it's not just me doing the talking. There were parts of me that were trying to silence my own personal story, which is really bizarre when you think about it, because I didn't want to tell anybody how I felt. I didn't want anybody knowing, because it made me sound like I was crazy. And after growing up and our family telling Mom she was crazy because we didn't understand dementia, I didn't want to be the one that everybody looked at as crazy. Problem was there was this little girl deep down inside that had a very private, very personal story she did not want told. So every time the mic was turned on, the cameras were turned on eventually, my throat continued to close. So I had to go through some therapy and work on that. But in the process, I thought if the focus was not on me and it was on somebody else, then I could do this. And that's how it worked. I started to interview guests the intent was to answer my questions and help me understand things, but also if I had these questions, I knew other caregivers had them too. So I started to interview others to help get past that insecurity.
Tell us about the connections you have made while working with the guests you have had on the show.
Well, I was grateful to work on my own insecurities, because the more I met people, the more I felt confident about what I was doing, and I didn't care that the cameras were on. I didn't care that I was sharing my story anymore, because I saw the purpose in it. And the purpose was connecting me to individuals that were helping me in the moment, whether it was learning something about how to care for Mom or learning about how to care for myself and planning stages and becoming gradually seeing the picture with each individual guest. I saw the need to become that proactive caregiver, because each one was significant in the contribution that said, in order to plan ahead, in order to be proactive, you have to do this, you have to be this, you have to change these habits, you have to do these things. And so the goal through each one of these guests connected me and connected the dots to how to prevent dementia, which is not an idea people were open to. And so meeting guests, like the legal side of it, or the lifestyle side of it, or a very dear friend of mine, Marion Boldenwine, who was one of the earlier friends and guests that she connected me to the editor for the book and the encouragement of writing the book. And so it was a very personal journey. And I could slowly see that each one of these guests, it wasn't just learning something, it was a friendship. It was a connection that I needed. And it was in all the people in the world, I was connected to this person for a reason, for a purpose that helped others, not just myself.
How do you feel about where the show has come since those early days?
I'm excited because since those early episodes, I mean, they were all trial and error and learning and finding the foothold and getting past my fear of being on camera, getting past my fear of hearing my own voice even. So from those early days, from those early episodes to where we've come now, really embracing and being excited about adding different types of technology to it and how to make it not just look better, but how do we make it more inviting for others? How do we make it more of a tool, of a resource for others and be relatable? And so I look at things so differently now. I started out just wanting to share my story, and now I want to share it in such a way that it grabs every caregiver out there that says, that sounds like my story. How did she handle that? So those early days to now, I've seen so much growth, not only in myself personally, because from the time that first episode started to now, I've had countless sessions of therapy, and I started to feel like the show itself was my own personal therapy. And if I felt that, and if I could be able to empower others, then that's what this show is intended to be. And that's where I finally started to see, oh, that's what all those years ago, every time I tried to lay down, for the love of God, give me some rest, and he was showing me these images of where you're headed. Now I can see it. Now I feel that familiar vision from years ago is actually coming to fruition, and I love it. It's a different side of me. It's a different side of life, and it gives me something to look forward to, because I know the more I help and learn myself, I'm helping you and others to look at how the world sees dementia differently.
Where do you see the show going, and how do you hope to evolve it?
So when the show first started, I had no idea of where it was going to go. It was simply audio. I totally didn't see the cameras coming. And when the cameras came, I had to have some camera therapy. The cameras had to be in the room a couple of times, not even on, but just so I could get used to the feel of it being there. Now, the cameras are not only in the room, it has turned into more of a show. And so I see the show growing even more and expanding, not just locally, but going beyond our borders and going global, because caregivers and caregiving is a global concept. Dementia is a global concept. Of course, it seems to be growing faster in the US, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist around the world. And so I see those early visions that I had just growing exponentially. And as I've meditated on where He shows me I need to go, I'm going to trust that He knows where this path is going to take me, and I'm going to seek it out and see where this journey leads me. Hello, everybody. I am the Proactive Caregiver, and I specialize in educating others on how to be proactive by empowering you, the caregiver. Because if you cannot take care of yourself, then you cannot take care of your loved one. I cannot believe I'm saying that for the 100th time. Today is celebration for a milestone for the Proactive Caregiver show. I cannot tell you that I knew this was coming, because when I first started, I didn't feel comfortable at all doing a podcast, let alone adding video. I honestly didn't think I was going to go past 10 episodes. And now here it is today, celebrating 100. From the beginning, I wanted to share our story, because I understood the lessons learned were not just my lessons. They were lessons to be shared, because I appreciated the lessons that were shared with me to help me along the journey that was beyond challenging and emotionally exhausting. In preparation for today's episode, I had the chance to go back through the last couple of years of episodes that I was afraid to share, but so glad I took the opportunity to share them with you. So let's recap on just a few. In the first year, our first season of the podcast, in 2020, I covered 28 topics. I went from caregiver routine to exercise to nutrition. I even covered areas of Ayurvedic massage and legal compliance. And then we went into music therapy, enneagrams, which was very interesting, and finally, the preventative dentistry for seniors. I actually wanted that to be a very focused topic, because in the beginning, the two areas that made a big difference for me was, one, guests like Virginia Sampson, who thankfully shared with us about the importance of legal compliance for caregivers. Virginia helped go over the 5 legal documents. She also covered what happens when the family becomes unhinged, and then the planning for this aging process and the importance of it. It's not something that is out there for caregivers to know right off the bat. And I personally did not understand or need this until I kind of stumbled into this within a support group. And the caregiver compliance, it sounded odd to me, because this is for me in my situation, it was my mother. Why do I have to have the right to care for my mother? But now, after living several different scenarios, I now understand yes, anyone can care for their loved ones, but even with spouses to an extent, there is a legal right that caregivers either have or don't have. So what would you say is the best way to kind of explain this risk management form through the legal documents?
Well, you're so right. We tend to think that because it's our husband or our wife or, our parent, and we're taking care of them and we know everything about them, that somehow everybody's going to listen to us automatically, right? But it's not true. There are state laws, and each state is a little different. There are state laws about who can make decisions for other people. And so if you want someone to recognize it, whether it's a bank for a financial or the hospital for healthcare, most of the time you have to have the designated form that's sanctioned by the legislature here in the state of Texas to be able to make decisions for your loved one in whatever arena it may be. So I typically recommend, there's like 5 basic documents I think caregivers should have. So typically what I tell people is that this is for you to have you, so that you can have more control as you age, because we're all going to age. Mm-hmm. And the truth is most of us are going to reach a point where we're not going to be able to manage our own affairs. And who do you want to do that for you? And so when you sign these documents, you are able to select the person or persons you want to make the decisions for you that you feel will make them in accordance with your wishes.
Right.
So those are a couple of pointers. Do it early. Present it as you are going to maintain control. And then if it doesn't work with you talking to them, sometimes you can get someone that they trust, a minister or a financial advisor, an attorney. Sometimes coming from somebody other than a family member, people are more receptive to getting the documents done.
Definitely. It doesn't feel as invasive, I guess, when someone else is coming forward, because it's someone else is speaking to their best interest and whatever issues might be there with the family, because, family drama can take precedence sometimes. It's not so much of a threat at that point.
Right. And don't forget, people won't say to me, oh, my parents are healthy. We know that can change in an hour.
Right.
And, we all get along, and we know that can change too, because family members just respond differently to stress. Yeah. Right. You're all getting along now, but your parent gets sick or somebody gets sick, and all of a sudden some people just come unhinged.
Absolutely.
And they're not very rational.
Right.
So, I would say just get it done sooner rather than later. And if you can kind of present it to people like that, people usually know a last will and testament, right? And these are just kind of documents they should have, just like they should have a will, right? It's like you plan for your retirement, you plan for all kinds of things. This is just planning for the aging process.
That's true.
Because we are all going to age. So I try to present it like that to people, and then they usually feel much less threatened. I also get a question, can people with dementia or Alzheimer's execute the documents? It really depends where they are in the disease process. The standard is that they have to be able to understand the nature of the document they are signing. Okay. So people with dementia can do that. I mean, my mom had dementia, but it had not progressed to the point where she couldn't execute some documents. Right. So that's another reason sooner rather than later, because especially if they even have the beginnings of dementia or Alzheimer's, we know that can accelerate quickly. And you want them to be able to do it, because again, without the documents, then if it becomes necessary, then they have to go to court and have a guardian appointed, and then they lose total control.
Right. Right. This one was a difficult one for me, because even though Mom still had her faculties about, when you start talking about the end of life, it gets to be very emotional. Mom coming from that depression side quite often, more often than not, I always felt like that end of life choice was because she didn't like aging, and she certainly didn't like the way she was aging. And so she was just ready to give up. But then later on, with another conversation I had with my cousin even, who she's already gone through this process with her dad, and she reminded me to make sure I always had the advance directive on hand. She actually asked me, do you have one? And I said, yes. And she looked around. At this time, we were actually sitting in the kitchen having a conversation, and she looked around the room and she said, where is it? And I said, oh, I have it with me. I actually keep a copy in my car. And she looked around again and she goes, but I don't see it out here. And I said, well, why? And she said, if you have that emergency moment and you've got to call 911, you got to call that EMS, you need to pull that copy off the refrigerator or pull it out of your foyer drawer, and you need to hand it to them, because when it comes to end of life situations and you have those emergency moments and you do have to call 911, their response is to fight for life. And if your loved one has already signed an advance directive that says do not resuscitate, you're going against their wishes. And if you are going against their wishes, because emotionally, when I had this conversation with my sisters, they didn't like that idea of having to let go of Mom. It's one thing when your loved one is sick and they're deteriorating by the day, there's an end in sight that's actually coming. But it's another thing when it's in that emergency moment and you don't have that moment to say, but I didn't get a chance to say goodbye. Or, if a heart attack or a stroke happens, it is still something that they chose in advance. And part of that process of the fight for life with an EMT, for example, if they have to administer CPR, for example, that may actually break someone's ribs. And the recovery process afterwards, someone who especially has dementia is going to recover slower than they would if they didn't. And so I realized at that point, okay, I need to respect mom's choices, regardless of what. If this is what she wanted, it's not just because she's coming from, I'm depressed and I'm ready to let go of life. It's a choice she made, period. And that was really hard for me to accept it, but I accept it. And I have my copies in the kitchen. I had my copies in the car. I had a copy in my purse. If that's what it is, that's what it is. All right. And now we continue with preventative dentistry, an area that when I reflected on mom's history and how we got to this place of living with dementia, this topic seemed to be extremely important because back then mom had a lot of dental issues going on. She had some rebuilds, reconstructs. And then within a couple of years after that, some of the symptoms started to be not so obvious, but it wasn't until I had this conversation with mobile dentist Joy Poscosum that I really believed, wow, this isn't genetic. And I think this was the first time I had that thought. Listen in.
One thing that I want to point out is that there are actually two different kinds of dry mouth. There's quality of saliva and quantity of saliva. And so people may think that their loved one or they themselves have enough saliva because they technically do have, they don't feel dry, they're swallowing okay, they're able to, eat their foods that they want to, the salty, the sweet, all the things. But the quality of the saliva might not be the same. Why? We get older and our, things begin to not work as well as they did in our 20s and 30s and 40s. And so therefore, we are not concerned about it because, there is some saliva. But one thing that we need to be looking at is what the saliva looks like. Mm-hmm. Our saliva is actually supposed to be crystal clear and a little thicker than water because it's got these wonderful digestive enzymes to help break down our foods, before we swallow, so that they're soft. But if it's thick, if the saliva is thick, if it's mucousy, if it has the consistency where it is almost kind of sticky, then we've got a problem. And so they might have enough saliva quantity-wise, but they might not have the good quality. And so we are looking at a situation where they may have the same problems eventually as those that don't make enough saliva, where they are going to be more prone to tooth decay or cavities. They are going to be more prone to having potentially tooth sensitivity, or they're going to be more prone to gum disease because their gums really aren't, all of our gums are supposed to be moist, but even with this quality of saliva, the gums aren't as moist as they should be. And so therefore there's a higher chance of gum disease, of bleeding gums. And so now as the caregiver, you're brushing your loved one's, teeth and gums and you notice the bleeding and you're like, oh my God, I'm brushing too hard. I'm doing something wrong. So thinking outside the box, brushing the teeth does not have to be in the bathroom. It could be at the kitchen sink. It could be done in the living room with those little pink basins where they can be spitting in there. They're comfy. They're watching TV. They're being distracted. But you're still being able to accomplish something that is so crucial for their overall health.
Exactly. And that's the point. It's trying to find ways to help them without actually making things more difficult for them so that they don't want to do it. Because I think that's what happened with my mother is she did reach that point where she just didn't want to do it anymore because it was a hassle. And unfortunately, she did buy into a lot of the advertisement years ago, as you mentioned with Listerine. And some of it says it's as good as or better than brushing, but it's supposed to be in addition to brushing. And at one point she did stop brushing and did only Listerine. And when she went back for a checkup, It was the worst checkup she could have ever had. And they told her as much. And she was upset because it was Listerine's fault. She actually contacted and took the time to type a letter up and send it to Listerine. And their response was, well, it's supposed to be in addition to brushing. Which unfortunately
she took that ad very literally.
She did. And so she opened the door for other problems to happen, with her teeth and her gums. And that's where, when she opened the door for that, hindsight looking back, I just wondered, could that have been the gateway to her first form? Because she is living with mixed dementia. So I'm asking and wondering, is that the gateway to being exposed to dementia, for example?
And that's a really good question. In a nutshell, about 5 years ago, they found when they were starting doing autopsies in those with Alzheimer's in particular, that the plaque formations in the brain, they found oral bacteria. They found Pseudomonas piriformis, or gingivalis, piriformis gingivalis. And say that's 5 times fast. Right. So 5 years ago, as I'm beginning to tell this to my patients, because I also have a brick and mortar, to my patients that are not my seniors, I'm like, look, guys, we don't know chicken or the egg yet, but by taking care of your oral health, you're keeping your immune system strong. Therefore, there's not a surplus of this particular kind of aggressive oral bacteria that causes gum disease and bone loss. They migrate, they cross the blood-brain barrier. Specifically in those, or especially in those who have compromised immune systems, aka diabetes is the first one I can think of,
right.
Especially long-term diabetes. And that includes type 1 and type 2. Type 1, they're compromised, pretty much from birth with their type 1, so even more so type 1. But they cross the blood-brain barrier, and they've been found in these plaque deposits in the brain. So the more we take care of our mouths, the healthier our brain health is going to be as well.
As the seasons continued, we get into 2021, and now mom's progression with living with dementia has become a lot more challenging. So I covered another 32 episodes and topics that were very important. I know they're all, but in this journey, understanding the risk factors for dementia, and then understanding the stages.
When people are experiencing dementia, they may or may not also be unable to perceive that their skills are actually changing.
Right.
So it's called anosognosia. So some of us are going to have a parent or a loved one who is entirely able to understand that they're losing skills. And your experience with the person who knows they're losing skills is going to be that it's going to be like the elephant in the room a lot of the time, that they will be terrified deep down, and they are grieving, and they very well might appear to be depressed, but they're grieving because they know what's going to happen. They know what they're losing, and they know what will happen to their families. They know the cost. But then others of us, we have a loved one who is completely unable to perceive that they're losing skills. Like sometimes people are able to say, yeah, I know, I'm getting a little forgetful. But they're completely unable to admit or perceive that they cannot make decisions anymore because their rational thinking skills are fading away.
Yes.
So they can't understand that they're putting themselves at risk. And so these people, instead of being fearful and grieving, they're angry, they're irritated, they become paranoid, they're protective of their personal space. They might lock the kids out of the house. It's so different if you can't understand that your skills are changing. And that just happens when the dementia affects the part of the brain that allows self-knowledge. So really, I think your listeners were divided into these two main categories. Those who are dealing with awareness and grief and fear, and then those who deal with anger and refusal and paranoia.
Yes. Just because there is that misunderstanding of what dementia is. And it's just like you said, the loss of memory in connection with Alzheimer's. But Mom didn't have Alzheimer's.
It was probably 2 years before I could really see that there is a pattern. It's not a medical pattern.
Right.
It's not disease plus symptoms equals treatment equals cure. You could do that with a disease. You can do that with Alzheimer's disease.
Exactly.
But dementia is the result of any number of diseases, any number of bad reactions to, say, anesthetic or chemo. It can be because you had a traumatic brain injury earlier in life. It could be because you've been experiencing cardiovascular disease for some period of time.
Absolutely.
We don't even know why children are beginning to have dementia. It has to be lifestyle. It has to be nutritional.
Exactly.
We're not going to cure dementia.
No.
But the pattern is whoever you are and whatever form of dementia you're experiencing, you're eventually going to see changes you're going to lose your memory skills, and you're going to lose the ability to access information from the past. That is, in essence, as a concept, that's your remembering self. You're losing that. You will eventually live in the present. And the present is about 3 seconds.
Right. As time continued during 2021, I started to recognize changes in Mom. The progression was happening faster. So I invited Dr. Sammy Winemaker to come on because I wanted to know how to recognize the signs of dying. It may be a topic that others think that's too morbid, but knowing an end was coming and trying to stay in the proactive mindset, I wanted to know. Of course, back then, I wanted to know the details to prepare for them and be ready. But now, when I look back, I believe I really needed to know because emotionally, I wanted to also be prepared. What was going to happen? But it doesn't happen that way. So let's listen to Dr. Sammy Winemaker for just a second.
If I had a magic wand, I would make sure that in nursing school and in medical school and all of our training, that we would make sure that every nurse and every doctor graduated knowing that providing a palliative approach is part of everyone's business. It is not reserved for palliative care specialists. This is everyone's business. Everyone's got a stake in it. Every cardiologist, respirologist, geriatrician, oncologist, everyone should be trained properly so that they can naturally provide a palliative approach when it's appropriate for their patients who are facing progressive illness, and not at the 11th hour, that they integrate this into their skill set while they're caring for people right from the diagnosis. Because, for example, if someone is diagnosed with dementia, we know what the average life expectancy is. We know what the different stages are. We know that a palliative approach is appropriate, maybe in small proportion at the beginning and grows over time as time goes on. But you shouldn't have to transfer to another team to get that type of care. Yes. That type of care should be integrated into the care of the physician who's taking care of that person with dementia while they're still exploring disease-modifying opportunities, that both of these things can exist and coexist together. So this old-fashioned idea of palliative care starts right at the end, and it's really only if you get a palliative care specialist, is so old-fashioned. Yes. It's a philosophy of care. It's an approach to care, and it starts from the time of a diagnosis of a progressive life-limiting illness, and it's woven in seamlessly so that the patients and families and caregivers never feel like there's been a transfer of care to palliative care. It is just integrated so seamlessly that it just feels for the patient and the caregiver like good care. That's all it is.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for saying that, because that is something that as a caregiver, I have taken mom to a handful of different specialists and feeling that disconnect from each one and trying to figure out how to get them all on the same page. And for me to be on the same page to understand what everything is and not feel like I have had to become this medical detective. And only until recently, after doing this for a couple of years now, have I been able to finally connect mom's cardiologist, for example, with her gerontologist. And the services that are available are there for her, but the communication and the flow of all of it, it does give me that final feeling that, and the confusion and frustration in addition to it, because then I'm talking to the cardiologist, they've explained this is the status, these are the needs, this is what you can expect, or they water it down for the sake of the patient. You're fine, you're great, you're good, you've got several more years to go. And in my mind, I'm thinking, I think I'm recognizing some of those trends that you were talking about, but that disconnect is there. And it's almost as if, well, I've done my part. I can just pass you off to the next stage or the next specialist and let them dig into the details. Yeah. And so then I feel, and I can't imagine mom before she was even in these advanced stages being passed to the next specialist and the next specialist, aside of feeling that what's wrong with her, what's wrong with us, what's wrong with this process. Oh, now we have to go somewhere else and hope that we get more answers. And a lot of times, instead of looking for answers, we're looking for the comfort. We're looking for the knowledge that says, this is normal, you're okay, this is the process, this is what you can expect going forward. Yeah. And so now my detective work is, when do I contact hospice? When do I start getting that ball rolling? Because I have no idea. All very helpful information. But when the year rolled forward into 2022, it was no longer all about mom's progression, because it turned towards me, and it was the first time in my life that I started to experience changes in my hormones. Facing the emotional roller coaster with caregiving was one thing, but facing changes and challenges with my hormones and approaching perimenopause did not help at all. A lot of others refer to as the surgical menopause. Yes. There's the natural, which I feel like I'm going through the natural menopause now. And I did that at first. Oh, it's just stress. Oh, it's just, because I knew years ago that I would have interruptions in a cycle where I was like, okay, but then it was like I was only a day late versus being, hello, where'd it go? What's happening here? And then everything else coming with it. So you had that surgical difference. Yes. Versus the natural.
I did. And like I said, it's like hitting a brick wall. But then if nobody's talking to you, it took me several years after the surgery to even figure out, like, I'm using the estrogen patches, I'm using the estrogen gel, and I'm like hoping it's going to help. And it's not. So then I started looking up natural things, ashwagandha, the maca root. And, but those things, like, I needed like something. A lot. Yeah, I needed a lot. And so it might have been a good 6 or 7 years that I went without this. And then it was a decline in, my sexual appetite, my desire, all of those things too that come with menopause. And it got to the point where my husband was like at his wit's end, and he's like, you have to we got to figure this out.
So now that you have been able to figure out what it is and how you're going through, because it's not just you, right? With your husband, it's not just what you're experiencing. He's experiencing a decline, a change as well.
Almost a loss of intimacy, a loss of, I'm just going to leave it at that, a loss of intimacy,
Yeah.
because, sometimes that's his love language.
Right.
He loves
Right.
to kiss me. He loves to
Right.
hug me. He loves to touch me. And, then that leads to,
Of course,
the other stuff. So if it's like, because of what I was going through, I was just like, look, stop kissing me, stop touching me, because no. And he's like,
it's not going to lead there.
yeah, he's like, what did I do? And I'm like, it's not you. Like, and they don't understand that.
No, they don't. And it's that cliche, it's not you, it's me. Well, in this case, it really is me.
It really is. Yeah.
Which is why I laughed when you said in your comedy routine, when you said they shouldn't call it menopause, they should call it menostop. And I thought that's so, because it literally was just like one day, just like you said, for me, everything just stopped.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until reaching that point that I had to look back, okay, how long have I been experiencing these hot flashes? How long have I had these night sweats? How long have I had this moody blues? And it all started coming together. And I was like, okay, well, instead of experiencing the big O and enjoying it, I'm experiencing the little O for old. And that made me feel so sad, because I'm not in that mindset. I don't want to feel old, and I don't like talking about that old, like I'm becoming old. It's not just a number, it's a mindset.
Yeah, it is. But, aging, we can't help it, because our bodies are eventually, back to dust.
Right.
And so we've got to, even with the mentality, because if I, people, when they see me and like the energy levels that I have or whatever, they cannot believe I'm as old as I am. But it's mind over matter.
Exactly.
Up until a point, because your body is still going to age. Those hormones are still going to decrease. Right. And it's up to us to just, put them back in there. But you made one point of, especially being a caregiver. My mother-in-law had dementia and Alzheimer's. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't her main caretaker, but whenever she would come and stay with us, Julio and I would have to do that. And paying attention to your body, so that it's almost like when you're on a plane and the plane is going down, they tell you to put your mask on, oxygen on, before you help the elderly or children. You have to take care of yourself and know what's going on with your body. Mm-hmm. And something that I see that, and I'm not pointing any fingers, but a lot of caretakers, they let themselves go, and then they're eating fast food because it's a quick fix. Right. Because they don't have time to worry about themselves. They're worried about, whoever they're taking care of.
Exactly.
But they have to stay in tune with their bodies and what it needs and what it doesn't need.
So on top of the hormones changing, dietary issues, didn't really understand what was happening, mom's still progressing, and this environment of caregiver overwhelm started to run away with me. But thankfully, in that space of feeling overwhelmed and not knowing what I needed to do, I learned the importance and the positive reinforcement through creativity. Check this out. My caregiver journey has had many ups and downs, but sometimes those straight and narrow pathways are filled with challenges just the same. And these challenges require self-care. And although I maintain regular self-care regimens, this time I need a little bit more help. These challenges have led me to a familiar heart space, one that I've had to learn how to embrace the unknown, just so that I can find peace. Find peace in that letting go once again. So Dad's goodbye years ago was not the long goodbye that it has become with Mom. So embracing this unknown has become overwhelming. Rather than find peace like I've done before in researching, I'm trying to find the peace in just being still. I may be many things, But the caregiver in me is a mama bear. And this bear knows when it's time to retreat to a cave for a hibernation of replenishment and refocusing. I happen to do best when I can channel my broken energy into a project. Those projects have helped me over the years to free my mind. Finding that creative space has pulled me out of some of the dark spaces. So all that I've gone through over these past few years, these end stages were the hardest. And as we came into the season of 2023, Mom's journey came to an end. That was a very strange and painful and unique way to say lessons were learned in all sorts of ways. The hard way, gentle ways, with grace, without grace. But nonetheless, I acknowledge that the past seasons were all part of life. They were things, they were moments that they weren't happening to me, but they were happening for me. Changing my mindset, learning how to look at things differently, new perspective, makes a world of difference. And that's what I've been trying to share with you as you go through your journey. Not only learning how to be a proactive caregiver, but how to look at things differently. We have so many more topics to cover because now is the time, and it has always been the time, to be honest, but caregivers need help and they need it now. So I invite you to share your stories with me. If you are willing and you are ready, send me the topics that you want to talk about. Contact me and you can do your interviews with me so that we share our stories and help other caregivers learn. Because waiting for political changes, that's going to take some time. Not that it's impossible, but that will take some time. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to be a political chess piece in the way things are designed. I do want to take this time to provide a special thanks to my producer who has helped make this show possible and has encouraged me and has grown with me over the years, going from just sound, having the audio only, helping to encourage me with that, and then helping me through those moments of camera therapy, getting me used to all of this. So thank you, because we have many more episodes to work together. So ladies and gentlemen, I hope as time has changed and goes on, that you have episodes to listen to enjoy, that you suggest even more, because we are stronger together. And I hope this episode has brought a little bit more food for thought for you. In the meantime, be proactive, ladies and gentlemen. I get to enjoy my gluten-free chocolate cupcake. Cheers. Thank you for joining today. To find out more about becoming a proactive caregiver yourself, visit proactivecaregiver.com and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Music provided by www.joystock.org. The Proactive Caregiver is produced by Canon Light Media.